Final Fantasy 14. A franchise who varies from entry to entry and often receives critical acclaim for its innovative and engaging stories. It's dipped its toes into a variety of genres, from tactics to rhythm games to racing games. The franchise thrives on its ability to reinvent itself with every entry. At least, I like to think that. So, when the 14th entry is actually a massively multiplayer online game, or MMO for short, it too has garnered the critical praise the franchise is known for and is now kind of a tentpole of the genre alongside World of Warcraft. If you're going to try an MMO that isn't shooty gun space or something far bigger and more evil than I could comprehend, you're probably going to play one of these two for what people would call a more traditional MMO experience. Or at least that's the conclusion I came to in 2017 when I already had Battle.net installed for crippling Overwatch addiction. I realized I had a free Winston pet waiting for me in WoW and booted it up with one of my friends. I loaded into a dark forest and wandered around to try and meet him before finding out that he made a different race, and that meant we wouldn't meet for several hours of gameplay, which kind of soured the whole experience for me. That day, I vowed to never play an MMO again. Until 2 years later, when my Amazon Twitch Prime membership offered me free playtime for the critically acclaimed MMO, Final Fantasy XIV in early 2019. I logged on, created a wizard character, and jumped in. Only to get really bored after a few days and lose all motivation to log back in and take advantage of that free time I got. After that, I vowed to never play an MMO again. Until another 2 years later, when one of my friends said he wanted to get into MMOs and another person suggested to him to try out Final Fantasy XIV. I had already reflected on my time with the game and had only been hearing positive things, especially with the lead up to the new expansion Endwalker at the time. So I decided to jump into the experience with a fresh, more patient set of eyes, since others were also taking the plunge. And this time it worked. I love the story and the characters, along with the addictive gameplay and challenge that the game could offer over its countless experiences from years worth of content. I have a happy catboy now, and I have continued to play since 2021. But getting into the game was a journey compared to the usual plug in a game, play it, or drop it, and it's over. I had to revisit the game and confront multiple external sources before I was convinced of the value that Final Fantasy XIV had. And I know it's not exclusive to me. Over these past few years, I've tried to convince all kinds of people to play with me, and have watched so many just give up over their playthrough just like I did back in 2019. As each member fades away and says they might try it again another time, I've wondered what about the introduction to Final Fantasy XIV is making it so difficult for the experience to stick. So let's explore the introduction of this MMORPG and figure out what the great filter is that prevents people from playing it, and ultimately, why Final Fantasy XIV, A Realm Reborn, is a flawed introduction. Before we really get into it, let's go over some ground rules. First of all, this entire video is timestamped and separated into specific portions where I talk about specific stretches of the campaign, gameplay, whatever. So if you don't want to get spoiled but want to hear my thoughts on some specific aspect, feel free to jump around. Each portion of the story is also separated into specific stretches of levels in the MSQ that'll be labeled. So if you find yourself interested, don't want to go past a certain point, totally an option. For this investigation, I am playing on a brand new character that is generally only allowed to interact with content from patch 2.0. That is, anything that launched with the game originally back in August of 2013. There's a couple of exceptions to this, some features that are just so deeply ingrained into the experience now that they are unavoidable, some items that make the leveling process go faster that I've gotten from pre-ordering stuff throughout the years, and stuff that offers me just convenience like flying. I also couldn't resist ocean fishing. This character was played during patch 7.0 and 7.1, which generally took place from August of 2024 to December of 2024 for this character specifically. These patches had a graphical overhaul to older areas of the game, so if any footage seems less lush or not as well kept as it is now, that's probably why. I also changed monitors and got experimental with my UI pretty frequently, so you might see various buttons and bars and location changed. I'll go over it, I have thoughts on that, but that's why it looks like that. So with all that said, let's take the first dive into Eorzea. The game begins like most self-driven adventures with a character creator. My character, Egg-Deviled, is a Final Fantasy bunny boy, or a Viera, I think is the name in canon. The options are robust enough. You could probably make a character that you're happy with, but realistically each race only has so many face options, so a lot of the characters end up looking too pretty, so not many people stand out. It's fine, because realistically it's what your character does and how you pose them that gives them their personality, but they are a little similar and kind of blend. Anyways, your character's starting destination is actually determined by which class you choose to begin as. I chose Marauder, so I ended up beginning in Limsa Lominsa, the pirate nation. The plot generally follows the same course and leads you onto the same track pretty fast no matter the nation you start in, with the only difference being the setting and a few characters. So, we wake up on a boat to this nation, get to know a peddler, and then make it to the destination with a sweeping narrator introducing you to the environment.
Through peril and hardship, discovery and triumph, may the navigator guide this brave soul on his life's voyage. Till sea swallows all.
From here, your character registers with the local Adventurers Guild and ends up performing odd jobs for clients until you end up running into a person of note. These odd jobs familiarize you with setting through smaller, self-contained stories. More specifically, these quests teach you about the two main antagonists. The Beast Tribes, which are mainly composed of fantasy creatures that hold grudges against the people of their nations for their own reasons, and cloaked figures that are empowering the Beastmen and anyone else who is up to no good. After continuing these quests for a bit, I had the pleasure of meeting this cat researcher named Y'shtola, and together we fought a big golem monster. After defeating it, it drops a magic crystal, which, upon your character interacting with, they have a vision of a goddess known as Hydaelyn asking them to save the realm from darkness. Whatever that is. Y'shtola is clearly interested in your vision, but doesn't really press for details and withdraws, leading your character to continue helping out with random quests. At the end of this string of quests, you end up defeating one of these cloaked characters in a battle, which gets you the attention of the city's leader. For Limsa, that would be Admiral Merylvid. You're invited to meeting with them, and during it, you pull out the magic crystal you found, which impresses the Admiral, and she informs you that the crystal indicates that you were received a blessing from the goddess Hydaelyn, and have the ability to be known as the Warrior of Light. Previous Warriors of Light stood tall, but after a large battle known as the Battle of Cartno, all of them were removed from the memories of everyone. The people remember their good deeds, but no names remain. This battle also left the realm in an awful state, as many of the nations are currently recovering from the extreme damage. While this is being explained to you, another vision comes to your character, taking place at that battle where the city-state leaders are giving orders and the shadowy cloaked figures are observing the battle. You wake from the vision after being brought to an inn and receive a message that the Admiral wants to speak to you one more time. When rendezvousing with her, you are told about a need to establish more communications with the other allied nations, and that she wants to send you off as the state's representative. And with that, you're off on a grand adventure across Eorzea, gaining access to the rest of the nations. So, that's a decent start to any story. Intriguing bad guys, the world has a history, which you have become a part of with the discovery of this crystal. No real stakes yet, but the nation is clearly still recovering from that battle 5 years ago and is currently trying to move past it. You'll also notice that I elected not to give that battle a whole lot of context in my summary. This battle is portrayed in a cinematic cutscene that plays when you idle at the title screen, or it's just the generic trailer that you find when you Google A Realm Reborn. This cutscene is an amazing ending to what was 1.0, the failed version of the game, and is incredible with the given context. But watching this the first time without that context as a consumer makes the cinematic just kind of a generic medieval battle with a big dragon for the first half until it's just a compilation of environmental shots. It's an incredible trailer, but more context is needed to appreciate what it's depicting, and a new player isn't going to understand that. They're probably here at the recommendation of a friend or something and aren't watching it, or if they are watching it, they're probably just thinking, this is nothing like what the game actually is. And there's the major issue with this opening. In a pursuit to provide context for every little thing that this universe has established, the story gets lost in the weeds far too frequently. The summary I just went over took about 4 minutes to go through all the major beats and have a player understand what occurred. However, when translated into game time, that opening actually took me 5 hours. And that's not 5 hours of fun, intriguing cutscenes and gameplay. That's 5 hours of walking to point on your map, talk to NPC, learn NPC's problem, solve it, go to the next guy, and repeat, with a cutscene sprinkled in maybe every 1 hour and 45 minutes. These problems aren't engaging either. They're very rarely more complicated than a monster has shown up and is making something more inconvenient for that NPC. And I understand the purpose of this. Your character is truly going from a nobody who just arrived to someone the city-state leader can trust. Except the game treats each and every quest as an opportunity to teach you every little thing about the established rules of this universe. It's so bad that it reaches a point of information overload, where some context that's vital to understanding the overall plot ends up hidden in a field of dialogue that should have remained optional. In that first attempt to play this game back in 2019, one of the big reasons I quit was because the game was taking its time explaining Stalewern and his motley band of farming pirates. Now, I'm sure Stalewern's plight was vital to my character's progression and learning how to be an adventurer, but the amount of names during that quest includes his crew, his orchard, and all of the hardships they've endured that the game goes through these great lengths to make you understand. They all end up being a minor side note in the grand scheme of things. But this side note takes up half of the introduction and a ton of playtime. The second time I played and actually made it past these farmers, my eyes were so glazed over from information overload that I didn't realize the significance of the later cutscene, where the Admiral actually shows up and tells you more about the Warriors of Light. The game treats every little moment with reverence, but the characters you meet are so obviously disposable at this point in the game. The only characters with voice acting and cutscenes you meet are the Admiral and Y'shtola, so it's already obvious who you actually need to pay attention to. But if you're like me, you're still going to try and pay attention to everything, which kind of makes the whole process feel longer than it actually is. The game also struggles with the way it delivers its lines in the first half. Each sentence is marred with medieval jargon that turns one sentence into three. And it was especially bad in Limsa, where everyone is a pirate. And that's not all that plagues these opening hours. Plenty of beloved RPGs start slow narratively. It's kind of a staple of the genre, to get to those massive moments at the end. But unfortunately, this game belongs to another genre that keeps its gameplay from truly shining till far, far later, making these opening story beats feel even worse. When playing any video game that has been released after the year 2000-ish, I think most people expect a tutorial or a form of communication that directly tells the player what they are capable of. Unfortunately, an MMO isn't able to deliver that super easily. Games like this have a number of systems that have been implemented over the course of many years and can't really just give you a button prompt that says space to jump and expect you to instantly be ready for all content from easy to hard. So, Final Fantasy XIV and most MMOs usually slowly roll out abilities to have players get used to their gameplay loop. In Final Fantasy, this is accomplished via leveling your chosen class and slowly being given actions on a toolbar. When starting out, you will generally only have 1 or 2 abilities, which will then gradually increase as you gain experience from quests and combat. On one hand, this has the awesome effect of each skill you acquire slowly building off the last one. So when you reach the point that you're going from 12 skills to 13, you instantly understand where and when that skill needs to be used in relation to all 12 skills that you've already mastered. But that also means that when you begin, you will only have 1 or 2 skills. That means you're only hitting 1 or 2 buttons for combat. So effectively, your opening hours will only be walking somewhere, reading text, and then hitting the same button over and over again, and then walking somewhere, and then reading text, and then hitting the same button over and over again, and then walking somewhere, and then reading text, and then hitting the... You can see how this gets repetitive in combination with the complaints about the game's story that I had earlier. The story doesn't give you a reason to continue with its low stakes, and the gameplay doesn't really shine till far later, making the opening slower than most other games I've experienced, including other RPGs. The game also makes an extremely poor first impression on launch with unconventional default controls and a difficult-to-parse user interface. To begin, the ability bar itself that you start with has some odd decisions attached to it. The keys 1 through 9 are used as the default controls to access any ability on it, along with some preset actions like teleporting, sprinting, and a link to Square Enix's own online play guide. Along with this, there's a second bar that can be accessed by hitting the same buttons but with the control key held down. These keys are kind of uncomfortable to reach from W, A, S, and D when you get past the number 5. It gets even worse when you have to hold down control to use the second bar. I think this kind of gives the impression that you should stop moving to use any ability, when realistically you can keep using many attacks while moving, making combat probably feel even slower to a new player. These other actions on the bar are also odd. While I think Sprint probably has a home on all players' bars, Return and Teleport are debatable. Teleporting can be done in 2 ways, using the action, which brings up a list of available targets, or by clicking on an icon on the map, which is generally more self-explanatory if you don't want to cram your head with location names and just click the nearest location to a quest icon you have. So the action on a bar is a bit redundant. Return is a glorified free teleport to a specified location only available every 10 minutes, rendering one of your 20 selected abilities on your preset bars useless for 10 minutes at a time. Meanwhile, the online play guide is a joke, acting more like a wiki than an actual step-by-step guide, probably confusing new players more than it ever helped them, which is also assuming they actually clicked on it, which I feel is probably the last thing anyone wants to do when starting a new game and expecting a tutorial of some kind. And this is just the character's abilities. The game feel itself is kind of awful at this point in time too. There's pop-ups for tutorials that need to be manually closed along with default tank controls. Yeah, I don't really know what the logic here was, but at the beginning, W, A, S, and D has your character control like a tank. Full sprint if you hold down the forward button, or a slow walk backwards if you're going backwards, with left and right controlling the camera. If you're playing on controller, it's not as bad when it comes to controlling the character, but the hotbar is even more confusing and way less self-explanatory. All of these decisions are kind of just ignored by long-term players, because the great thing about it is you can turn them all off. But for a new player, especially ones that are more acquainted with how games are formatted now to make learning actions more streamlined, this isn't really acceptable. The HUD can be fully customized, yes, keybinds can be changed, the tank controls can, and it absolutely should, be turned off, all by exploring the settings. But the effort a player would have to go through to change all of that? If you're a new player just trying to find something to play with friends and you need to go into layers upon layers of settings menus to tune the experience perfectly, there's a pretty good chance you're just gonna walk away. And to be fair, the community hasn't ignored these issues. There are plenty of videos and guides to HUD customization and player control changes, but the core issue is that none of these answers can be found in the game itself in a clear manner. I think this could be pretty easily resolved with some alternate UI presets in the game to communicate that, yes, this is all customizable. Give players a choice in control style right at the start instead of just throwing tank controls at them that can only be changed in the settings. Recommend some alternate keybinds instead of just those numbers. The faster new players understand how much can be changed to suit any need, the better. And look, I'm not asking for some watered-down version of the game where buttons you need are reduced, or everyone has to have the same scientifically proven most efficient UI. No, I just wish that what I knew about how this game can be customized was easy to understand for any player. On this character, I got some friends to play with me, and it was such a challenge working with them on what they should and shouldn't change about the HUD, controls, and otherwise. That's not their fault. It's probably the game's for hiding everything behind a different menu, System config settings, character settings, HUD layout, keybinds, all of these are different menus, which then have to be scanned for the correct setting to change something that I previously mentioned. I've spent a lot of time changing things in this game, and if that process was more streamlined for someone who doesn't want to watch videos and test their settings over hours of gameplay, it would probably be better for everyone. Alright, I know this video feels very front-loaded with complaints, but that's my main problem with A Realm Reborn. This game is so obtusely front-loaded with overly complicated systems in combination with simple gameplay that getting through these first 5 hours feels like an almost impossible task. This opening is like walking through sludge, where every step forward is met with some new resistance, either through boring story or an unclear gameplay method. The poor side quests in this game show up on the map to tempt you into learning more about NPCs, but usually offer little in terms of amusement to the player and even less in terms of rewards. This is a common complaint, and a common point brought up by the community. Oh, it gets better the farther you go. But in a world where every live service game is competing for a player's time and an industry that is looking for growth from new players, this introduction is an awful argument for why you should dedicate your time to this world. And I hate to say that. I love this game. I continue to put time into it to this day. I've met fantastic people through it, and I completely agree with that sentiment. It does get better. But this issue of accessibility and game pacing needs to be addressed if new players want to continue being onboarded. A fast track through this first 15 levels of story in only 1 hour would be a blessing, and an easy character startup option with a simple compilation of voiced cutscenes. The world of Final Fantasy is magical. The franchise is so iconic because of it, and this game is no exception. I just think some elbow grease is needed on this opening to let those parts shine, because they really can shine. So, on a more positive note, let's talk about the environments. In my limited experience with the Final Fantasy franchise, I find one of its greatest strengths is the world building and environments you find yourself in each game. The medieval setting of Final Fantasy XVI with its separate kingdoms and areas, Midgar in Final Fantasy VII with its dystopian separation of classes between layers, Final Fantasy XIV is no exception to this rule. And while the environments can be considered a little generic by medieval standards, I think the opening areas of A Realm Reborn thrive in the ambience that they create. You'll be journeying across 3 distinct regions in the opening: the deserts of Thanalan, the lush island of Vilbrand, which is home to Lenosha, and the dark forests of the Black Shroud. While they are generic biomes in the grand scheme of gaming, covering desert, tropical island, and forest, I think the soundtrack and set design of each area help to create a distinct identity. In this particular playthrough, one of my favorite things to do was turn off my UI from time to time and just have my character walk through with the music washing over you, giving you a better feeling of adventure and wonder. Thanalan's theme shows that the land is clearly a punishing desert, but the people choose to continue to fight and thrive despite it. The Black Shroud's theme creates a quiet forest that could consist of only you and the creatures that dwell within it, at peace with each other. Lenosha creates a theme of adventure, showing an island full of lush rainforests with wide plains that are ripe for exploration. While none of these themes are something that you would necessarily hum along to or call iconic, I think they do a fantastic job of putting you into the setting of the game. The battle theme leaves something to be desired though, and I find it comes off as a little too generic for me. It has some variations depending on where you're fighting, but the track isn't really unique enough to stand out. Town and city-state themes, on the other hand, are just as fantastic at painting a scene as you get acquainted with how each city-state operates. Ul'dah is a massive, vibrant city, Limsa with its call to adventure, and Gridania with its cabin-like atmosphere. The modeling and environment design also does just a fantastic job at displaying this, with Ul'dah refugees camped outside, Gridania with its water wheels and generally peaceful vibe, and Limsa as a bustling seaport full of vendors and people. These areas perfectly portray where your character is in the nature of each area, which keeps me engaged and filled with joy, as I continue to trudge along a story that still leaving me a little bit less than engaged. Jumping back into the story, your character leaves their starting city as an ambassador to other nations. You then attend meetings with each of their leaders. Each meeting leads to an agreement that the nations must begin working together again with the threat of an external invasion from the neighboring country of Garlemald appearing to be on the horizon. To begin uniting these people, each nation elects to hold a remembrance ceremony for the battle that transpired in order to unite the people over a common cause. After these meetings, your character goes on some smaller adventures to each area and resolves some issues that each nation is having by exploring and defeating enemies in dungeons. Thanks to these smaller adventures, your character probably has a pretty good idea of each nation's role and people. Limsa, where we started, is a nation founded by pirates that are now adjusting to land life, leading to a strife in ideals of plundering versus respecting trade with other nations. Gridania is a nation that venerates the forest and the spirits that dwell within it, which causes a lack of trust in outsiders and what they could do to damage the forest. Ul'dah is a nation full of wealthy and poor, with extremes in both directions. It's led by a panel of the richest merchants along with a ruler by blood known as the Sultan, which leads to its extreme disparity in how it treats each of its wealth classes. It's in Ul'dah where you happen to help a woman who was falsely accused of robbery, causing you to gain Y'shtola's attention once again. She finds you there and tells you that she's been observing all of your good doings and would like to invite you to her secret club. This club is the Scions of the Seventh Dawn and consists of the cast of main characters who you'll generally be journeying with from now on. They have Y'shtola, who acts as an arcane researcher, Thancred, who specializes in subterfuge and sneakery, working as an intel gatherer for the group. Papalimo and Ida, who act as the funny man pair, where Ida is the brawn and Papalimo the brains. Urian J, who is the ponderer of the Scions, acting as a historian and has a tendency to make 3 text bubbles into 5, which I guess is nothing new for this game. Tataru, who is the bookkeeper and front-facing person for the Scions. And finally, all of them are led by Minfilia, who is the leader. That's her character trait. She's the leader. They inform you of the group's prime directive, which is to keep the realm safe from otherworldly threats, mostly consisting of what are known as the Primals. Primals are the gods of beastmen that can be summoned through the use of crystals, which are frequently stolen from merchants. These gods will be summoned and then brainwash those in their vicinity to become worshippers, which then makes them want to collect more crystals for the gods, and the cycle continues. But Minfilia details the blessing that you received from Hydaelyn and how it can help with the slaying of these gods. Given the name the Echo, this blessing not only acts as a convenient plot device allowing the player to get bad headaches and look back in time for some convenient exposition, but it also makes you unable to be brainwashed by the Primals, making you a prime candidate to defeat them. So this is your challenge from now on. Journey forward and defeat each of the Primals as they are summoned by the Beastmen. This results in a number of adventures with the Scions, where you continue to learn about the nations and Beastmen, with shadows of darker plots being revealed to you as you go. In one, you go with Thancred to uncover a plot to trick the homeless of Ul'dah into getting brainwashed by the Fire Primal, Ifrit. In another, you work with Ida and Papalimo to meet in the middle with a friendly beast tribe, the Sylphs, by rescuing their village elder to prevent them from summoning a primal in the first place. You wrap up this string of adventures by working with Y'shtola to find a group of heroes who previously confronted the Earth Primal, Titan, to find his weakness and a way to stop him as he is summoned again. In the background of all of these stories, two threats appear to be observing and empowering all of the adversaries we are facing. The shadowy figures are identified to be what are known as Ascians, immortal evildoers that want to bring about calamities by any means necessary. This could mean helping to summon a primal, giving someone power they shouldn't have, etc. And then there's the residents of the Imperial State Garlemald. These are military invaders on Eorzean soil that appear to be observing each primal summoning as they work towards an unknown end. While both of these factions play very little part in the actual adventures with the Scions, it isn't very long before one finally makes its move. After observing all of the Scions' successes, Garlemald decides to invade their home base, kill the majority of their ranks, and take the rest prisoner while you're off on an adventure. You return to the headquarters littered with bodies, with the only advice is to look to the church for any allies who might still be alive. So I actually sectioned off the story in this video for a pretty big reason. I think A Realm Reborn's general quality only increases as you make your way through it, with 3 specific portions. Obviously the beginning is where I feel it's the weakest, but in the case of the second chunk, a lot more of the themes and character goals of the story come into the picture. Instead of just being an adventurer who's making their way up in the world, you are now a proud member of the Scions with a clear goal of preventing the summonings of these gods and defeating them if the need arises. I believe right here is where the story goes from sluggishly boring to sluggishly acceptable. The Scions are a great community for you to bond with and get to know, make fun of the way Urianger talks, Thancred has roguish charm and wit, Y'shtola is a smart cat girl who very clearly has no patience for nonsense. These are relatively fun characters to get to know and help make your character feel even more motivated to help them. Meanwhile, the realm and setting itself comes into focus. Eorzea is very clearly recovering from the calamity 5 years ago, and your character gets to witness and resolve some of the repercussions of that incident. The introduction of the primals and the fights that follow them are also a massive highlight. Defeating these gods is bombastic and exciting. The cutscenes that lead up to them and follow them build them up as the major threats that they are, so it's really exciting for every time you have the opportunity to confront them. The story is coming together. But why does it feel so sluggish? Well, unfortunately, despite the new purpose in the writing and story, a lot of the issues from the early game are still here in full force. The NPC's dialogue still feels like it takes 3 sentences to deliver information that should have been delivered in 1. Despite this goal in the narrative now, the game still seems to find a sick and twisted enjoyment in keeping you from achieving that goal in a straightforward manner. There are strings of quests that feel closer to wild goose chases, with little reward at the end other than enemies taunting you or giving you a vague, "you've grown powerful" speech. I mentioned Y'shtola's adventure earlier to work with the old group who defeated Titan. Well, in order to do that, you have to travel to every end of the continent to obtain different parts of a feast, so that you may convince a group of adventurers to give you the location of the primal so that you may battle it. While everyone's freaking out about the resurgence of this destructive force, you're busy trying to find cheese for a goblin, going on a quest for exotic wine, or showing your combat skills to random NPCs that have minor roles in the story. These side tangents can add fun flavor to the area, creating a more lived-in story, but it comes at this massive cost to the pacing of the narrative. In this specific instance, all of this ingredient gathering ends up taking like 2 to 3 hours of gameplay. You get hyped to fight another god and then meander for 2 whole hours before any of that pays off. And the game makes fun of you for it in the dialogue. Y'shtola mentions multiple times during the questline how much of a waste of time it is. So the writers are almost laughing at you for having the gall to put up with their BS. There are other plot points that you'll also miss if your eyes have a tendency to glaze over like mine. At one point, you visit what's known as Little Alamigo, which acts as a refugee camp for residents who once lived in the nation of, well, Alamigo. The Garleans invaded this location before the events of the story, and this plays a major part in the expansion that came with patch 4.0 Stormblood. But that payoff won't happen for another 50 to 100 gameplay hours, so by the time where that stuff would have been cool to remember, you'll likely only remember that Little Alamigo was a place you visited once that didn't further the plot. It could have just been left as a side quest that would reward players who chose to do it, instead of just making it a required tangent that feels like a waste of time and a complete non sequitur to the story you're already experiencing. Also, you'll notice something else this far into. The voice acting leaves something to be desired.
No! Hello there.
Welcome! Is aught amiss?
No, it is nothing. Together, let us heal the forest's wounds, that our progeny might live in harmony beneath these ancient boughs. For serenity, purity, and sanctity. We must think of the children!
Woods will be done.
It's up to us to protect the
For
forest.
the elementals!
I'm sure these actors are talented, but to me it seems clear that they were provided scripts with little direction and character description. It doesn't help that I think Minfilia, the character you engage with the most by far, is easily the one that comes off the most flat. This makes this poor character into a joke. The consistent returning to the headquarters to report to her and her exposition spouting means she never really develops into a character of her own. Like I mentioned earlier, she is the leader. And that's it, which is a shame for a character that you're forced to interact with so frequently. Again, I don't think I'd consider this stretch of the game bad though, despite all of these criticisms, but I definitely wouldn't consider it great either. Or maybe in good territory, maybe leaning a little closer to meh when we're in these crazy tangents. Story has purpose and direction now, but achieving that is still rocky with a relatively unfocused approach to delivering information. It feels better because you know what end your character is working towards, but with the frequency the story likes to get sidetracked, it's hard for that hook to really grab you and keep you invested. At this point in your adventure, your levels should have reached around 30 to 40. This means that the days of pushing only one or two buttons over and over again are mostly behind you, unless you're a healer. But regardless, whatever class you chose should be forming its own identity. This is when the combat really starts coming together and learning to master your characters starts becoming really fun. These classes come in three main flavors: tank, healer, and damage. The tanks have a relatively basic 1-2-3 combos with intermingled instant attacks to put in between those, but the majority of their gameplay comes from using abilities to make them take less damage at the best times in any fight. Gladiator, which evolves into Paladin, focuses on taking damage for the party and keeping everyone as safe as possible with massive mitigation, while Marauder, which becomes Warrior, is focused on self-preservation as it focuses the target down with health regeneration abilities to keep itself alive throughout the fight. The healers will focus on keeping their teammates alive and also interspersing as much damage as possible in between casting spells and managing their magic. Conjurer, which becomes White Mage, focuses on raw healing, while Scholar, which comes from Arcanist, focuses more on providing shields to lower damage taken, while its summoned little fairy provides the actual healing. The damage classes can come in a couple different varieties. A ranged DPS, such as the Archer, which becomes a Bard, attacks from afar and provides buff to the team by serenading them with song, which speeds up their attacks and damage. The magic DPS make efficient use of their spell options to dish out the most damage possible. Black Mage, which begins as Thaumaturge, uses all of its mana fast to deal massive damage before casting spells that provide more mana so they can deal massive damage all over again. The Summoner, which also comes from Arcanist, summons baby versions of the gods that you fight in the story, which gives the class access to more spells themed around the various corresponding elements. Finally, the physical DPS focus on their main combo while interlacing them with as many abilities as possible to enhance that combo or build to a new combo. Lancer, which evolves into Dragoon, has moves that provide buffs to its own outgoing damage that need to be managed while focusing on a main combo. Pugilist, which becomes Monk, effectively has one really large combo that enhances itself, over and over again, with occasional extra damage opportunities that it sprinkles in between that combo. All these classes feel special in their own way, and these were only the ones that are available to start with. Many have been added over the years, and all of them feel pretty distinct when it comes to their actual gameplay rotation at level 50. You gain all of these abilities through job quests, which are effectively smaller storylines that pertain only to your class. I like all of these. They feel more personal since they are directly about you, the player, learning how to become better at your selected art, and the characters found in each one are generally likable with their own motives that have to do with that art. These are reprieves from the main story, and I was always excited to see what would happen next to my mentors and training buddies and whatever wacky adventures we were going on. All these classes are essential for what are the two main pieces of content that you interact with: dungeons and trials. Throughout the main story, you'll be tasked with jumping into an instanced area with a party of players to conquer whatever threat lies within. These are generally the most fun parts of the game, with each one having a completely unique environment and story tied to them. Plus, they are a great way to use and master all of the abilities that you've been learning over the course of the story. I was going to try and rank these originally, but I realized that they generally only get better as you continue the game, so here's a small collection of thoughts for each one. Sestasha. Honestly, this dungeon is nothing. It just kinda introduces you to the system. Also, I hate the clams that are in it. The Tomtara Deepcroft. I wish we actually saw the dead bodies that are supposedly in here. It's kind of just a stony area with a spooky vibe. It's fine. Copperbell Mines. This dungeon introduces more involved bosses with damage patterns to dodge. It's pretty fun and finally adds some layers to combat. Thousand Maws of Totorak. Rock? I don't know. This has the same boss twice and is also just a straight shot, so, well, it doesn't have the clams that Sestasha had, so I guess points for trying. Hawk Manor. Big old mansion with a bunch of side rooms to explore. I actually like this a lot. It's pretty cool and engaging since it doesn't feel like a straight line, which most other dungeons are a victim of. Brayflox's Longstop. I hate the premise of doing this dungeon for cheese, as I went over earlier, but it does have silly goblins and dragons, which are like the best things that the fantasy genre has ever invented. Also, the tropical setting is generally just pleasant. The Sunken Temple of Karn. The idea of evil wasps that can one-shot you only in this optional random level 35 dungeon is really funny to me. No one actually does the mechanics in here though, with the statues. Cutter's Cry. I will never remember the Chimera eyeball color mechanic. I can do extreme content and a lot of challenges in this game, but the eyes are just too much. Hope you know the difference between violet and blue. Stone Vigil. More dragons, so more better. Also, the fight with the tornadoes is really fun, and it's fun to see teammates go flying during the fight. Castrum Meridianum. I think that's how you say it. Cool base infiltration sequence, but I can't really hear what I'm thinking about. The Praetorium. Actually, after the rework that this dungeon got, I think it's pretty cool and finely tuned. The second boss fight is a massive highlight for me with the music, only held down by the required cutscenes on repeat playthroughs. Wanderer's Palace. Tonberries are a brilliant concept for an enemy, guy with knife. So the dungeon, with a whole bunch of them, is really fun to go through. But the area in the middle where you have to get all the oil is kind of a nightmare if you play with someone who doesn't know where they're going. Amdapor Keep. So I've been calling this one Ampador for my entire life, and I don't really know how to feel now that I'm reading the title for real. Oh yeah, Wall Boss. I love the Wall Boss. In addition to these dungeons, you also face trials, which are the bombastic fights with the primals in groups of 4, working their way up to 8 players as they get more difficult. These are really fun and have great spectacle in combination with the music that plays in each one of them. I think the early ones can be a little slow to actually becoming exciting fights, but once you reach number 3, they really start to shine and make you feel like the hero you are. There is a slight problem with all of this content though. Due to the nature of the game receiving updates constantly since 2014, one of the things that have changed since launch is the abundance of experience that your character gains. This means that generally, your character will probably end up ahead of pace as far as level requirements for the main story goes. sometimes in the range of 5 to 10 levels above where you're expected to be. Now, granted, my character had a bunch of experience buffs in the way of equipables and being on a relatively new server which doubled any received. But this is still a common issue on normal servers too. The game's solution to this is a system called level sync, where the game will decrease your character's level to whatever the maximum level you could be at that time. So, for example, the level 47 dungeon Aurum Vale will only let you reach a maximum of level 49 when playing it. This can be manually disabled, but is generally left on when playing with randoms or experiencing content for the first time to prevent a level 100 god from joining the party and annihilating whatever you were trying to fight. And in that respect, it's great. But this also creates an unfortunate ping-pong effect of the player's level increasing and gaining access to new abilities outside of dungeons, only for them to be taken away again whenever running these actual experiences. It's not a major issue by any means, but I can see it contributing to the pacing issues for some players and making them feel like they are reverting, especially when you're in the early game and you're relegated back to hitting your 1-2 combo at level 17 and nothing else. But overall, I think the gameplay comes together at this point. Combos are fun to start getting muscle memory for, and the fights challenge that memory while also juggling mechanics and dodging attacks. The game is no longer you watching the character fight, it's you fighting. And that distinction makes the second half of the game fly by way faster and makes it more fun. And that's fantastic, because as we enter the final stretch of the story here, all of A Realm Reborn's strengths finally show in full force. So your character is now left with nothing. With the Scions dead or captured, you end up spending your time taking shelter and helping out at the church. In particular, you end up meeting a priest named Marcus, who appears to have a knack for repairing things. This continues until a guest arrives at the church. This guest introduced himself as Alphino and requests your assistance with a new quest. This character has been acting in the background of the game's adventures for a while now and is a known ally of the Scions. He seems fascinated by a lot of Eorzea's political failings and wishes to support the Scions in uniting the nations against the threat of both the Garleans and Primals. In his appearance at the church, he claims that there is another Primal stirring and that he needs both you and a certain legendary engineer's help. This legendary engineer is none other than the priest Marcus, whose actual name is Sid, but had lost his memories due to the events from 5 years ago. While Sid is reluctant to join you, he changes into his engineer outfit and both of you agree to confront the primal of the bird people, Garuda. This primal is primarily of the wind aspect and has put up a large wind barrier preventing anyone from accessing her. This is the reason for Sid's help, as he has an airship known as the Enterprise, which could possibly break through this barrier, allowing us to confront them. So the search begins for this airship as the party follows the ship's trail to the cold land of Korthus. What they find there is a harsh, never-ending winter that has clearly taken its toll on the people who live there. In addition to this harsh climate, the people there are part of the nation of Ishgard, which has been contending a war with dragons for thousands of years, with heretics worshipping these dragons, looting supplies, and killing those who venture into the snow. This has caused a natural distrust of outsiders, which you must struggle with as you search for the airship. Eventually, when you do find its location, you aren't even permitted to enter where it crash landed due to this mistrust and have to win these rights by foiling a heretic's plans. The only face kind enough to welcome you here is known as Harshaphon, who is instrumental in providing you the support and connections that your character needs to gain access to the fortress where the airship is being held. After defeating the dragon that guards the airship, you all bring it back to Gridania to make repairs and ensure that it is ready to face Garuda's harsh winds. So you set off. And on your way to face the Primal, Sid actually regains all of his memories and reveals that he is actually of Garlean descent. While he may be born from an enemy state, he never agreed with their ways and chose to turn against them, looking to create, quote, freedom through technology, and forming a company of his own known as Garland Ironworks. As this reveal ends, the adventurer, Alphino, and Sid all arrive in Garuda's domain and prepare to defeat her. The battle proceeds like the other two primal battles, but unlike the previous battles, Garuda holds her own and the two of you come to a stalemate until the Garleans interrupt once more. It turns out that they had been observing each fight your adventurer had with each god in order to tune an ancient weapon they had unearthed, known as Ultima Weapon. Through this tuning, the leader of the invading force, Gaius von Baelsar unleashes his new weapon on Garuda and defeats her with little effort. The other primals you had fought previously are also summoned by nearby beastmen in a panic, but Ultima puts them down too with little struggle, gaining their powers in the process. Your party retreats in the chaos, determining the only way to defeat such an ancient threat is with the help of the remaining scions. Upon returning to their home base, you find two scions who had managed to escape the bloodbath previously, Y'shtola and Ida, who explain that the rest of the scions who were deemed important enough to keep alive are currently being held in a Garlean base. So you all begin to hatch a plan to break them out, and with some help from Cid's partner and some subterfuge, you manage to free the remaining scions and escape on the Enterprise. But during that escape, you learn one final crucial fact. The reason the Garleans had found such an ancient weapon and were able to harness its power was thanks to the influence of an Ascian, and that Ascian's name is La Habrea. La Habrea also took one other proactive move that let the scions become so vulnerable. He possessed Thancred, which is what allowed the Garleans to find and attack their base in the first place. Now the realm is on the eve of destruction, and a plan must be made to stop Ultima before the Garleans take Eorzea for themselves. Yeah, so this is where A Realm Reborn, I think, finally finds its footing in the storytelling department. Taking everything away from the player and then giving them one clear objective of defeating Garuda with interesting characters to accompany you, refocuses the story to be more personal and allow it to explore its setting far easier. Coerthas, in particular, is a massive highlight in general due to its deep lore. While the earlier adventures that the Scions have you go on lead to characters and dialogue about each nation, a lot of the time that dialogue can feel like it was added in to provide unneeded context or add layers that weren't really necessary to further the plot or specifically affect your character. Ishgard, on the other hand, presents its lore as an active obstacle for the player to deal with. It's hard to meet in the middle with these people due to the issues they've had in the past. This makes characters like Haurchefant stand out in the context of the story and makes you want to learn more about it and where he lives, what are his motives. The setting serves to give a player a reason to struggle without feeling like it's explicitly dropping obstacles on you, which the earlier half of the game truly struggled with. Cid and Alphinaud are also amazing party members for this stretch of the story. Cid is a man who built his enterprise not from war, but by actively avoiding it, and learning that story and seeing how he carries himself creates a friendship between him and the player. Alphinaud is an overly confident character that can feel a little bossy at times, but the writing makes it come off as far more charismatic and heartfelt since he's always with you. You get to watch his immediate reaction to most things, making you feel far more connected with him compared to the Scions, who would more often be stuck behind a desk or sit and wait while you do the dirty work. Being with Cid and Alphinaud is fun. These characters feature interesting personalities and stories that propel you toward the main conflict. And that threat of the Garleans is actually pretty fun to see unfold if you've been paying attention this whole time. Each primal fight, they are watching and they observe, and they're always alluding to a game-changing weapon of some kind. And seeing that come to fruition is really exciting. The Ultima cutscene is an incredible payoff to this build-up. It's far better animated than most of the other ones, and really sells how big of a threat the device is. Breaking the Scions out of prison, on the other hand, is fine. Narratively, it feels a little hashed in, since you just accomplished exactly what you were doing before without any need for the Scions. But they are technically your friends, so I suppose it's necessary. That stretch of the game also takes place in Mor Dhona, which is one of my personal favorite regions. Featuring Revenant's Toll, which acts as a city that is founded by and run by adventurers, the location exudes a lot more charm with a music track that really encourages the mindset you'd expect in a location like that. Just a cool concept. And the actual wilds of Mor Dhona are covered in crystals and high-level enemies, making it a unique environment that stands out and doesn't fall as easily into a video game stereotype world. The mission to break the Scions out is also appropriately engaging and finally builds up the Garleans as more and more of a threat too. Admittedly, voice acting and presentation can still use some work at times.
We have to go now! Hang on!
Thancred! No!
But right here is where the story really flows. Each thing that happens directly leads to the next. which is funny to praise considering that is how stories are meant to be written in the first place, but regardless, it feels really good, and while the gameplay of walking and talking to NPCs technically remains the same, it feels so much better just with this recontextualization. So here we are at the end. A massive threat has emerged to take down all of Eorzea, and all the nations must work together to stop it. To begin, the adventurer has to go to a Garlean outpost and prevent them from requesting any more reinforcements. You prevail, and this clears the Eorzean alliance now made up of all 3 nations to attack the main headquarters of the Garleans. This can open a way to confront the Ultima weapon on their turf. You enter the facility housing the device with Cid and a party of adventurers confronting any who stand in your way. This streak of activities features battles against all of Gaius's lieutenants. One of these characters, Nero, is a big hit, with much of his dialogue referencing his jealousy towards Cid as an engineer. He easily has the most personality out of any of the villains you've faced. As for the other 2 lieutenants, I've never remembered their names, and they serve little purpose other than being obstacles. The fights are still really fun though. The first one is actually a solo mission where your character takes on a general and his army, with some cool scenes showing how much that army cares for their cause. Just some nice world building that doesn't actively impede the momentum of the story. Anyways, this breach in the facility allows you to confront Gaius directly, and by extension, the Ultima weapon itself, in the ultimate trial, the Porta de Communa. This is an incredible sequence which displays both the might of Ultima weapon and the strength of your character with the blessing of Hydaelyn at your back. After exchanging blows for a while, La Habrea appears once more to tell Gaius of an attack that'll defeat the adventurer once and for all, aptly named Ultima. Gaius uses this spell and goes into overload, unable to control the weapon from unleashing the attack, and levels the entire fortress and surrounding area. You're only saved thanks to the blessing, and despite Gaius's wishes, he is unable to control the machine now as it charges up to cast the spell once again and finish you off. The music creeps in, revealing that the weapon you're fighting wields ancient power, unable to be contained. But you can stand against it. You've grown and learned and can put down Ultima once and for all. La Habrea is disappointed with this result. Despite his best efforts, you are able to defeat the weapon and prevent it from casting any more devastating spells. This launches you into a final confrontation with the Ascian, where you trade blows until La Habrea is put in a weakened state. From here, your blessing allows you to manifest a weapon of pure light and drive the Ascian out of Thancred's body. This leaves him unconscious while you make a hasty escape from the crumbling remains of the fortress. Your character's good deeds have reached such a point now that you are now anointed, a warrior of light. The sun rises anew on the realm, and while threats still linger, the Garleans have been driven from Eorzean soil, and the Warrior of Light looks to the future in A Realm Reborn. Credits roll. Despite that, though, there are of course some endgame goals for players to chase right out of the story's completion. 2 dungeons unlock that I mentioned earlier, the Wanderer's Palace and Amdapor Keep. Both of these are great and play a part in one big quest that opens up, the Relic Weapon, which lets you forge a very shiny piece of gear that has been eclipsed in terms of power with years of updates, but still looks incredible to this day with more and more upgrades that come down the line to add more effects to it. This string of quests features some optional trials and requires searching for pieces of weapons in those endgame dungeons to craft with. I actually really enjoy grindy endgame pursuits like this. I think it adds a fun extra thing to work on when you're just looking for something to do when you open the game. Final Fantasy XIV is great at these. Speaking of, crafting. I don't necessarily think it's a major part of the beginner player experience, so it doesn't warrant too much of a mention in this critique, but it's a cool subsystem of the game that you can also level multiple disciplines up to 50, with their own stories and job quests attached to them. This lets you craft some better looking gear and minions to summon that will walk around the world with you as a fun cosmetic bonus. It's a good distraction from combat gameplay and is honestly in-depth enough that spending a bunch of time doing it is fun in its own mindless way while listening to a podcast or watching something on another monitor. All of this is to prepare and work towards what I think is the most fun part of the endgame, the harder trials and raids. A Realm Reborn itself features higher difficulty versions of the fights with the 3 primals that you fought in the main story. These scale the player requirements up from 4 to 8 players and have you use different tactics, requiring some teamwork where the original fights could be more mindless. These are really fun and are an awesome sign of things to come when it comes to fight difficulty and design. There's also the Raid, which unlocks after defeating these hard mode primals. I'm actually saving this experience for now due to the fact that the Raid story in just patch 2.0 actually isn't finished. And that technically goes for all of A Realm Reborn because this is only half the experience, since patches and game updates played such a large part in this game's life cycle. All the way until 2015 with the next expansion, the game would continually get updates adding new challenges, story beats, and ways to play the game, which includes the rest of the Raid story, all under the same A Realm Reborn umbrella. This content is great and continues the trend upward that A Realm Reborn starts in terms of quality. But the game presents its base story with a wrapped bow at the end of the Ultima battle, and right now we are focusing on all things that a player would experience in what would be a first impression. So maybe I can visit this content another day. So that is A Realm Reborn in its entirety. The highs kind of start hitting at a perfect time, so generally I remember walking away thinking that was an acceptable 7 out of 10 story by the end of it back in 2021. After spending however much time on this video, considering the upload date compared to when I played the character, I don't know if that's too generous or not. Your mileage may vary, of course, depending on how many terms you like to learn about and your patience for a lot of the side tangents it can go on, but I do think the entirety of it does a great job setting a solid foundation for a world that can continue to grow and evolve over the years. Lots of different nations are mentioned, with some having far more development than others. I can tell so much of the game's plot revolves around a super well thought out setting with the nation's relations, policy, and people all being incredibly defined and honed to serve as a good setting. Same with the villains. The Ascians, as these major manipulators alongside the Garleans and the Beastmen, create adversaries that can be explored more and more in depth over time. But that's always kind of been the problem with all stories, not just Final Fantasy. The introduction is generally the worst part. And realistically, A Realm Reborn is just that, an introduction. It doesn't help that the gameplay has such a poor first impression, with it feeling slower than molasses as you begin the game. All of this combines to create a massive wall for new players to overcome, and I fear in a world where humanity is deciding what short-form content to swipe away within nanoseconds, this doesn't do much in the way to convince a player that this experience is worth it. The player base has tried to do the majority of the heavy lifting in this regard, with numerous recaps, advice videos, and whatnot, including probably this one, but that requires a player to want to spend the time to look into a game they've never played before, which is tough, even with the amount of publicity that this title has gotten over the years. I truly think a fast track through this campaign would be a boon to the game's health. There is one already available on the online store, but one, that costs money, and two, this actually boosts you through the story added in patches too, which I believe actually houses a lot of A Realm Reborn and Final Fantasy XIV's strongest moments in general. A free skip up to Ultima Weapon with a summary briefer than this one would do worlds for the growth of this community. Would that be the best use of development resources? Probably not, since this is actually the condensed version of the story and they've already done multiple patches trimming things down in the past. But regardless, these first 40 hours could work better with some real elbow grease put into them. But for now, A Realm Reborn will stand as it is. A front-loaded introduction to a fantastic game. It's not the best first impression at all, but it does have the strength of establishing so much for the writers to play with later. Is it the best introduction for a game? No, absolutely not. But its strengths and environment can definitely still draw players in. And I only hope that it can still do so for years to come. But please, I am begging, turn off the default tank controls. Oh my god!